The takeaway of this video is that not all big cats are big. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with another model showcase video for this 1/72nd scale Bundeswehr Leopard 1 A5. The model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. This model here, being 1/72nd, is outside of my normal working purview. However, if anyone is interested in the scales that I do offer commission build services in, I can be reached via the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This model here is built out of the box. In this video, we're going to be giving the base starter kit a thorough in-box review. I'm also going to be going over the kit's various features, details, and lots of aspects on the build to watch out for as the builder. With all this in mind, there's going to be a bit of info and content coming right at you. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the German Leopard 1, or specifically the Leopard 1 A5. The Leopard 1 A5 is the last incarnation of this vehicle that was in service with the German Army, or the Bundeswehr. Of course, this vehicle here is based off of the Leopard 1, and the Leopard 1 is an iconic Cold War tank that was built by West Germany. Of course, the Leopard is also the first indigenous tank designed by the Germans post-World War II. After World War II, the country of West Germany was banned on having any sort of military whatsoever. However, this was definitely something that was reconsidered in the 1950s timeframe as the Cold War began to escalate. And it was deemed that West Germany needs to have a military in order to protect themselves from a potential invasion from the East. And the army that was founded was the Bundeswehr. The original vehicles that were used by the Bundeswehr were nothing more than vehicles that were US in origin, like the M47 and the M48. At the time, this was an expedient measure because West Germany was still trying to get back up on its feet, industrial speaking and infrastructure-wise, and they didn't exactly have the resources to pump into designing a brand new tank. Also, at the same time, there was a arms ban on West Germany producing their own military equipment, but this was something that was going to expire in the years to come. However, even though the M47 and the M48 were the mainstay of the Bundeswehr Panzertruppen, it was deemed that the M47 was already starting to show its age and was going to be inadequate, and the M48 also was beginning to start showing its age in the near future. Rather than looking at other vehicles for an export to import into Germany, the Bundeswehr decided to design their own indigenous tank design, and they used the design cues from both the M47 and the M48, and they went ahead and made those designs better suit their own needs, and the vehicle that came out of it was the Leopard 1. The vehicle's design work began in the mid-1950s by none other than the Porsche firm. However, unlike the vehicles that were designed by Ferdinand Porsche in the World War II timeframe, these vehicles were going to focus more on mobility and firepower as opposed to armor protection, and this can be seen in the Leopard 1's design. After a few years of design work and research and development, by 1965 the vehicles were ready to enter into full production and enter service with the Bundeswehr. The vehicle weighed in at 42 tons, had a crew of 4, and also had a single Royal Ordnance L7 105mm, which was of course the NATO standard tank armament of the period. In addition to the L7, it had 2 MG3 7.62mm MGs, one in the coax position, the other one on top of the turret for the commander. For the vehicle's engine, it utilized a rear-mounted power pack consisting of a Mercedes-Benz 838 10-cylinder diesel engine. Max speed of this vehicle was going to be 40 miles an hour. A very large number of these vehicles were built, and the vehicle stayed in production from 65 up to 1984, with a total of 6,500 and some change that were produced. Obviously, the Bundeswehr received several of them, as this became the mainstay of the Bundeswehr Panzertruppen, but the vehicle was also widely exported to several other NATO countries. Even during the tank's development period, both France and Italy were looking at the Leopard 1 as potential vehicles to add to their own militaries, as they were in a similar position as the West Germans were at the same time, with their tanks being a bit antiquated. Just like with all military equipment, after a number of years, the vehicle begins to show its age and needs some upgrades, and that was true for the original Leopard 1 with the all-cast turret. So in the 1980s and into the 1990s timeframe, life extension programs were given to the vehicle, enhancing the vehicle's optics and electronics, fire control systems, as well as also enhancing the vehicle's survivability by giving it some standoff armor protection onto the turret. All these upgrades accumulated into what's known as the A5 configuration of the Leopard 1. The Leopard 1A5 saw service with the Bundeswehr up until 2003, which at that point the vehicles were retired. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when this model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this vintage Revell Germany 1/72nd scale Leopard 1 A5. This one here is a pretty interesting kit, and it's also a very new addition to the stash. It's only been here for about a month or so, and the reason why I picked this one up, specifically a 172, is we know 172 is not exactly a scale that I often work in, but at times I kind of get a little craving or two, and it's kind of like getting a little snack size bag of chips at the vending machine, and that's essentially what we have here. I actually, as a point of reference, have just came off of a Leopard 1 buying binge, and I actually picked up quite a number of Leopard 1 kits in the last month or so, and this one here is going to be part of that batch. If you're a fan of Leopard 1, stay tuned for this channel, because you're definitely going to be happy in that regard. Back to the model that we have here. This one here, I picked it up off of eBay about a month ago, and these models here are somewhat not that common in the US, and finding them on eBay, sometimes you could find them for affordable prices to not so affordable prices. And there's a reason for that, and I'll go into that a little bit more depth momentarily. So as for the kit itself, this kit here was released by the company Revell Germany back in 1999. And for those who are unaware, Revell, for a while anyhow, was basically a two-company. You had Revell in the United States, and Revell in the US dates back to the 1950s, are one of the OGs in the plastic modeling racket, and are a legendary company. Everything from planes to cars, tanks, rocket ships, what have you. They've been in the game for a very long time. However, in the 1990s time frame, they went ahead and opened up a satellite company in Germany, and that's known as Revell Germany. Revell Germany originally was supposed to just be a distributor of the Revell kits in the European market. However, eventually they started to move from that point and start tooling up their own kits. What's interesting to point out is that Revell USA and Revell Germany, although they're under the same name, they're kind of working autonomously from one another, more or less, and the kits that are designed by Revell Germany tend to just be their own original tooling kits and are not shared with the US market, while a lot of the US kits are still just reboxed by Revell Germany and sold in the European market. Revell Germany, like I stated before, originally started doing reboxes of kits from Italeri, Eschi, as well as also some of the other Revell kits that I mentioned before. However, in the mid-1990s time frame, they started to branch off and to start making some of their own original tooling kits. And one thing that's interesting about Revell Germany is that they tend to focus more on a Bundeswehr type of a subject matter. Makes sense, they are in Germany, and the Germans love making vehicles from the Bundeswehr, so they definitely catered to that market. Originally, some of the kits, again, were from Italeri, and or from AFV Club in one case with the M88, and they would go ahead, take that kit, make a runner or two from their own tooling, throw it in there and with a new decal sheet, making it their own. However, they also started to make their own original kits, and this one here is one of them. This kit here depicts, of course, the Leopard 1 A5, which was the last iteration of the Leopard 1 tank in Bundeswehr service. The kit itself was tooled up in 1999 and has been sporadically reintroduced from time to time. Most recently, this kit here has, I believe, been re-released with another kit, and they sell it in a combo pack. It's either this one and the Bieber, which is the Leopard one with the bridge layer. I'm a little hazy on that. I'll probably throw a picture up on screen of one of the re-released new versions. However, this one here is the OG release from 1999. The other thing to mention is that Revell Germany kits are very, very prolific in Europe, which shouldn't be very surprising. However, in the US, they are less popular by and large. When Revell Germany releases a kit, they would go ahead and release a batch to the United States, or I should say they would distribute a number of them to the US, and when found, they are fairly affordable. However, there's a very finite amount of these kits that are actually released in the United States, and what it always happens with Revell Germany kits is that when the kits are out and they're brand new, they're everywhere, and then within like a few months or a year or so, poof, they're gone. It's like a magic act. They're no longer readily available, and when you find one, the prices on them tend to skyrocket. Which ties again to what I stated before, where I picked up this kit off of eBay, and I got it for actually a pretty decent price compared to some other people out there that offer these kits. Generally, when you find them on eBay, and they are fairly affordable or at market price, better look at that shipping because they tend to be located in the EU or somewhere else outside the United States, and you're going to be paying shipping back to the US, and it's going to elevate the kit's price to the point where, in my opinion, it's not really worth it at that point. This one here I snagged for a really good bargain for about 14 bucks plus 3 for shipping, and this was basically what these kits would originally have retailed for back when they were more fairly common. Lately, I've seen some of these kits in the US retail for anywhere between 25 to 35 US dollars, which is a bit crazy for a 172 in my opinion. But regardless, when you have an opportunity and you find one of these kits for a good deal, you might want to snag on one sooner than later because Revell Germany kits tend to have this mystique of being very affordable when found, and until they hit a point where they're not, and then they reach a cliff where they become insanely expensive. So that is definitely a pro tip, shopping tip in mind. If anyone out there is watching this video, or if you have one you want to sell it and you live in the US, you might be able to price gouge a little bit, shall I say. Back to the model here in question though. So these kits are all made from injection molded polystyrene, and you'll see that once I crack the box open. Starting with the model's box art and graphic design, one thing that I always loved about the older kits from Revell Germany were the outer portions of the box art. They had fantastic box art artists, and this is something that has been a recurring trend on their kits, and they just look great. They look different compared to the other manufacturers out there, and they just have just a certain feel to them that I personally enjoy. So here we have the Leopard 1 A5 right here. We have a very nice illustration where we have the tank right here in the forefront, and we have a Martyr all the way there in the background. That's a single color vehicle. It doesn't have the three-tone NATO, which they definitely do. But this one here is still left in its original Braun Violette, which is pretty cool. And the quality of the illustration is quite excellent. We have the nice little renderings of the armor plates over here. We have those rivets that bolted to the side of the turret, and everything is just a very nicely composed piece. The other portion that was great about, or I should say that was fairly attractive about the Revell Germany box arts, was the rest of the composition. So right here in the upper left-hand corner, we have the Revell logo. Like I stated before, the logo was identical between the Revell USA, or also known as Revell Monogram, and Revell Germany. In recent years, or I should say, yeah, within the last couple of years or so, Revell Monogram went bankrupt, and I believe the Germans now own them. A little hazy on that topic. If anyone knows, feel free to put that in the comments section below. But back to the one we have here. There's the Revell logo right there. And here you can see the remainder of the typeface. They like this old school newspaper typeface right here. And this is something that we see on all their older kits. And we also have this black background with this nice little handsome pinstriping going on, very commonly seen on their kits. Right here we have the same Courier typeface, or ish typeface, 1/72 scale, plastic model Bausatz. How would I pronounce this? Let me try that again. Plastik Modelbausatz is the German way of saying plastic model kit. It is 13.2 centimeters long for all those that are interested in that. Like I frequently mention in these videos, a common question I get is how they see the model, they know it's 135 or 172, and they ask me what's the dimensions on it. I hate giving those out. I just don't have time to go ahead and take measurements. It's not something that I'm going to do. So if you're interested to know that info, right here, there's the length of the model in question. The Grüne Punte logo right over there, which I believe is like a European recycling or German recycling type thing. And here we have, oh, we actually have a Illustrator shout out right over here where it has the ID of the person who actually illustrated the box art. And Mayo, he's pretty good. The kit question, or I should say the kit number is 03115 for those who are interested. And on this side over here, we just have some corporate information, barcode, basically just some verbiage telling you not to eat the thing. On the side tab over here, we have some more info. We have here a nice little thumbnail of the complete box art in question. We also have the same type of verbiage as before. And by the way, this is a skill level 4. Ooh, that should be very, very impressive, or it should be very difficult to put together, but I think I should be okay. Apparently, this thing was definitely in Europe at one point because it's priced out in euros, and it was originally $9.99 in euros. The vendor, by the way, that I purchased this from was in the US, so at some point in time, this thing must have crossed over the Atlantic. On this side here, you can see what the tab looks like in its El Natural form, with, again, the same verbiage as I mentioned before. What's interesting to point out is that on the back portion of the Revell box arts, they have some more stuff going on. Generally, they have some more advertisements of other kits that they have in various scales, as well as other merchandise that they do sell. So here we have some other cool kits. We have the Panzerhaubitze 2000. We have a MAN 10-ton wrecker. We have a Leopard 2A5, and we also have another version of the MAN truck. Like I stated before, Revell Germany really focused a lot on the Bundeswehr pattern of vehicles. I'm not sure which scales these are in. I do know that they do make a number of these in 135, but these ones here might be in 172, if I'm not mistaken. We also have here a MCV Warrior, which is a pretty cool kit, and also a Knoinkstigge, which I believe is 172. Down here, we also have something that just is not found in the United States, and that is the wide range of Revell paints and products, from glues to airbrushes. These things are all over the place in Germany. Not so much in the US. I've yet to actually see a kiosk in the US that supplies these paints. However, when I was in Germany, I went to a small little toy store in a mall, and they had an entire kiosk filled with all of this cool stuff. And it was pretty interesting to see, specifically for the first time. We also have here a nice little chart describing the difficulty ratings from 1 all the way to 5 for those that actually applies to. Cracking open the box to reveal the contents, and this is something that is, again, interestingly Revell in that all of their kits, be it small and large, have a side tab opening type box. This is something you generally don't see outside of really some older vintage kits like from Eschi comes to mind. So dumping out the contents. Okay, so the first thing that we have here is a decal sheet. It's printed on a blue paper backing. The decals look to be good quality. I'm not seeing any sort of cracking or anything along those lines, is what we'd see on some other older decal sheets from companies like Eschi comes to mind. And everything here looks pretty good. The quality of the printing looks very nice, and they were able to really get a lot of those legible markings in 172, which is something that is actually pretty commendable. Set this aside. Of course, we'll see how this pans out as the video goes on to see how well the decals transfer over to the vehicle and what they look like once fully varnished on. Here we have our instruction sheet. I'll touch upon that momentarily. And here we have the kit right here, still integrally sealed into original packaging. So I just opened up the wrapper. Hang on. Yeah, that smells like Deutschland. Okay, anyway, going ahead and pouring out the contents. So as I mentioned before, the entire kit is made out of injection molded polystyrene. As for the color of the moldings, it's the same forest green type color that was seen on a lot of the other Revell Germany kits for a number of years. It wouldn't be until very recently where they would change out the color of their polystyrene from the green color here, this specifically referring to their tank kits, to a white, gray, light gray type coloring. And this is something that I've seen on some modern kits that they've recently released. But old school ones here would have been in this cool green color. The other thing about the Revell Germany kits is that they're known to have some very good quality moldings on them, and they're kind of like, specifically in regards into the US, they're not really that well appreciated. They're kind of like in the background. Yeah, they're around, but they don't really have the fanfare that some of the other more super kit companies tend to have. And Revell Germany kits are kind of like a sleeper kit in that regard. But hopefully, after I build this video, it should look pretty well, or the kit should turn out well, and maybe it might turn around and get some love out there for some of these older kits, specifically from Revell Germany. Okay, so back to the kit here in question. So this runner here appears to contain the parts specifically for the A5 variant. And we have here the side skirts with that very distinctive German zigzag thing going. This is something that's been seen on their vehicle since the Leopard 1A4. We have here the 105. It appears to be a single molding, which is fantastic. No two-piece assembly nonsense to deal with. No seam removal, and if you have something like this that has lots of straps and things on that, seam removal generally becomes a bit of a chore. We also have here the IR light. I believe that's the IR lights mounted on top of the mantlet. We have the driver's hatch, which is molded separately. That's a nice touch. And we have here the gypsy rack multi-part assembly, which means nice detailing overall. We have here the rear bustle bin, and we also have here the mantlet. The mantlet appears to be the appropriate shape, and definitely it's a good dead ringer for the one on the Leopard. We have here the distinctive German pattern of hatches with that cool star embossing that's found on them. And we have here the applicant armor. This is the side armor, and one thing that's very nicely rendered out is the side armor. If anyone has ever seen a Leopard 1A5 up close, you'll know that the side armor sections are actually perforated with lots of little tiny holes. And we also have like some oil canning going on onto the armor itself, and these details are present on the tooling here in 1/72nd scale, no less. So that is actually very impressive to mention, specifically for the era this came out in. This is 1999. It was basically a transitional period in many cases between new and old tooling in terms of mold making, and this one here definitely aged, in my opinion, quite well. We'll see what that looks like after it's painted, but hopefully this comes out on camera and you can really get to see all of the integrally molded in fittings and geometry found here. It's a pretty elaborate shape, and again, all this is found from the get-go on the piece. No hand fitting appears to be required, but that remains to be seen. Here we have the Bundeswehr pattern of smoke grenade launchers, and we also have here the tarpaulin for the mantlet. Tarpaulin is nicely rendered out. It has all of the little ribs as well as the little snaps found on the metal sections that connected to the tank, and also it just has some nice folds and bends into the canvas integrally molded on. Very nice detailing indeed, again for 172. Okay, the next sprue takes us to the meat and potatoes of the vehicle, where we have here the turret and the hull. We have here the upper hull molding, which looks fantastic. I love the grill work integrally molded on. I also like that it has lots of other bits of detailing molded on, such as some tools, which may be good or bad at the same time. We have here all the Pioneer tools integrally molded onto the sides on either areas. And good thing is that this cuts down on part count. It makes the build a bit easier to put together. You don't have to mess around with finely molded little shovels and pickaxes. However, the side effect is that this does add to complexity when it comes time to painting, because you have to go in there and carefully paint little handles and shovel spades and make sure your paint doesn't drip. Is it impossible? Absolutely not, but it is something that you do have to stay on the ball for. The molding on these pieces are, you could say, are a little bit on the flat side, but given the scale and the age this was molded in, it's definitely perfectly fine. On the front here, we have some of the track grousers that are also integrally molded on. It's a distinctive thing found on later versions of the Leopard. And this one here, they look perfect, and it's going to be fun to go in here and get those dry brushed, but more information about that is to come. We have the non-slip sections integrally molded into the tin work there, and it's very aggressive. It's going to look great once it holds some paint. And that's really all there is to the upper hull. Let's go ahead and look at the rear plate over here. It has that distinctive Bundeswehr convoy X light right there. We have the other tail lights integrally molded on, as well as a few other appendages. Obviously, there's a bunch of other details that need to be added to this section over here, which is just going to add to greater accuracy. The tin work, or I should say the rear mud flaps, are also integrally molded on. A lot of kissies tend to be separate moldings, but on this one here, they took care of that. One thing that's really cool is that they gave you an option of exhaust manifold covers. This one here is the one that has the Death Star, the best way to put it, the Death Star type louver pattern, while this one here has just the grid pattern that we see presently. That's a nice feature that they give you, and it's basically you have to just do a little. I've been doing a bunch of research on the Leopard 1, trying to see exactly which one would work for this, but that remains to be seen. Either way, it's nice that the kit gives you this option. Really nice touch. We got some more tools over here that need to be glued on, a wrench and some other interesting bits of equipment. We have here the tow cables, which are pre-formed, so basically just snip them and fit them to their appropriate locations. And the tow eyes are, or I should say the cable eyes are separate, which is a really nice touch. Generally, this is stuff that you'll see on larger scale models. 172, it's going to be interesting and very fiddly to get those in place, but we'll see how that pans out. Here we have some toe shackles right over there, nicely molded. And this takes us to the turret. The turret, again, very nicely molded, and it is definitely one for a later version of the Leopard 1 where they shaved off the two little rangefinders that would have been originally found in those sections over there. They just welded a nice little plate over there, and that detailing is present on the model here. On the bottom portion of the pan, we have that divot right over there on the underside, which, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's clearance for the head of the driver, and that detailing is present on this model. The quality of the details of the periscopes look good. We also have here the little standoffs for the MG rings that get fitted in place. And again, everything looks really, really good. It's good tooling, and it's one that I would say aged pretty well. We'll talk about that nonsense momentarily. And this brings us to the lower hull. So the lower hull is a composite where it's almost a one piece, but it's also a multi-part assembly, where here you can see the hull where it looks like it's one piece here. One thing that's nice is that it does have its sponsons integrally molded on. This is something that you don't see on a lot of other kits out there, both large and small, but I personally like kits that have sponsons. The underhull detailing looks great. We have the little blisters here for the swing arm mounts, as well as also the escape hatch and a few other access panels for things like the transmission final drives. Although this one little section in the middle here kind of reminds me of the old Italeri Leopard 1 kits, where it would have the Italeri logo and then made in Italy. So it's kind of strange how they kind of have that block section here. I'm not sure if that's on the real one. It looks a bit dubious to me, but it's kind of funny that it reminds me of the Italeri one. Over here we have the side hull details. And here you get to see all of the details integrally molded on, so no spare or separate torsion bar arms to fiddly and mess right around with, or little shock absorbers. All of that is just integrally molded on one panel over here. Simplifies production, just glue it to the side and call it a day. On this side, you can see the row wheels. The row wheels are 2 half row wheels, which is fantastic. This is in great contrast compared to the old school Eschi kits, where the row wheel was just a drum and didn't have any teeth or anything found on the track. This one here, it's more true to form to the real one. As for the moldings, they appear to be in excellent shape and have some excellent details for the hubcaps as well as the lug nut details. It's going to be really fun. Also, they have their little Zerk fitting divots right there on the center of the row wheel, which is something that's always painted in red, specifically on these Bundeswehr tanks, and that's something I'm definitely going to be looking forward to. We have here the return rollers right there, some grab handles, and also the sprocket and idler. Sprockets have their teeth molded in, very fiddly, but also very nicely rendered out, and it's going to be interesting to free these parts off of the sprue here and get them assembled. So far, this seems to be a really awesome kit. And now we come to the part that I like the least about this model. Caterpillar tracks. Yes. You see, this kit here features, obviously, the dreaded individual link and length tracks. And as we know, I just have a burning hatred for these things. However, I have had some decent results in 1/72nd scale kits with using individual link and length tracks. And one thing that I've seen on all of the Revell Germany kits, specifically in 172, they tend to screw you with these things. And I've had only one other experience so far with a Revell Germany 1/72nd scale kit, and that video may or may not be posted before this one does, and that was with the Merkava Mark III kit, and that one I actually ran into a oopsie with the tracks, where the kit does not supply you enough tracks to outfit one vehicle. It was actually literally short 1 link per side. And that's part of the reason why link and length tracks are cancer and they're garbage, but I will be ranting about that further on in this video. This one here, it's going to be interesting to see if this one has that same issue, but if it does, I'll be sure. I actually have the techniques to address that and also to correct that. And that's something that will be, hopefully that's something I don't need to do on this build, but if it does, I'm definitely going to be showing you in the upcoming scene. Also, with how I assemble these tracks on these smaller scale builds, I'll also show that technique so you get an idea how, give you your best chance scenario and how to put these crap things together and not have your tank look like complete crap, because spoiler alert, they usually do. Most of these people who put these tracks together, the results are less than desirable. Normally, if this was 135, I'll just go ahead and wing this across the room and replace them with a workable or single piece option. Unfortunately, 1/72nd scale, different ball game. You don't exactly have that luxury, so I'm going to be forced to use these things here, and it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Back to the moldings, though. With my hatred and prejudice of individual link and length set aside, which is quite legendary. We'll go ahead and just review, though, the quality of the moldings. And I have to say, putting all of my hatred aside for this, the moldings are actually really good. The quality of the tracks look excellent. They have the rubber pads molded in. They also have the nice little end connectors molded in as well. The moldings look nice and clean, and everything is actually, again, molded to a very high quality. On the reverse side here, we have the interior detailing of the track, which was something that wasn't present on, again, the kits from Eschi from back in the day. If we go ahead and get the thing in focus, you get to see the internal moldings of the tracks, and they look fantastic. All the hinge detailing is there. The center guide toots are there, as is the skeletal structure between the rubber pad and the end connectors are present as well. The moldings look very clean. There's no injection pins or anything like that on the tracks, and they look to be good quality. If they're good enough quality to put together complete and all the track links are there, that remains to be seen, but again, we'll see how this cookie crumbles as the video progresses. Finally, this takes us to the instructions, and the Revell Germany instructions were always interesting, to say the least. They have this very interesting newsprint type paper that they use for their printings, and also the layout is also, it bridges between high quality and very simplistic. The printings are done in Poland, apparently, so for instance, they are usually in this book type format. They're not stapled together, and it's very easy to lose a page or get lost on the page. The drawings over here appear to be CAD, or not even CAD drawings. They appear to me to be hand drafted drawings, or I might be mistaken on that, but to me they do not look like CAD. They look like old school hand drafted drawings. But I will say this, the instructions were always very clear and concise. Germans, go figure. The sprocket is a multi-part assembly with the derailleur ring, which is pretty cool that they were able to get in that small scale. Yeah, that's going to be a whole heap and load of fun. Also, you get to see the other small little details that need to be added to the rear plate over here, and you can see why this kit would be considered a level 4, because there's lots of little bits that need to be fixed in place. Oh, it appears you also have a option of front mud flaps between old and new, and that's going to be something that I need to go ahead and mess around with. More details that need to be fitted. It appears that the mantlet cannot go up and down, just from the drawings that I have here, so we'll see how that pans out as the video goes on. But with the tarpaulin in place, it looks like it just gets glued solid. Again, it's just a data point. And I'm actually, honestly, unironically, really excited to get on this one and get this one together. So it appears that we have a couple different options for markings. It appears that it gives you could render it out in one of two configurations, which is great, that you have that option available to you, and it's going to be interesting to see which one I actually pick and roll with. But more information on that is to be seen. And here's the model going through its course of production. At this point here, it's just about ready to get its applicant armor, but before I do, I want to pre-prime some locations, just because once the armor is fitted into these areas, getting access to them with the paint is going to be much more problematic. So, as I frequently mention in videos similar to this, it's best to pre-prime these areas before the installation of these pieces can continue. Before the model goes and gets those components fitted in place, I might as well take the opportunity to show some of the model's features at this point here. So essentially the model's about 80%, maybe 85% ready for painting, and you get to see how well it goes together. And to the kit's credit, it goes together very well. I mean, to quote the ShamWow guy,
made in Germany. You know the Germans always make good stuff.
And if you take your time, the kit does go together fairly easily. The kit does give you several optional components, such as the exhaust manifolds back here, as well as this structure in the back, and it also gives you two options of the front tin work. But what's interesting to point out that the tin work options are the versions that, from what I can tell and from what I know about these Leopards, is that they are from a much earlier version of the Leopard 1. However, with this being the Leopard 1A5, generally these components, or at least from the examples that I've seen, were phased out with the later pattern of side skirts, which the kit does give you. So if you try to build the kit with the early components, you are not fully there, because several pieces on the turret are from the later pattern, and you can't backwards date it. So it's a little weird that the kit has that type of a feature, but either way, it does have a lot of options, so just take your time and progress accordingly. The one thing that did give me a problem was with the track. Of course, this kit being individual link and link track is not exactly something I like, but the kit, to its credit, did go together very well. However, I did have an error and a screw up with this track right over here. And honestly, and to be fair, this was not the kit's fault, this was my fault, but it's shit like this is why I can't stand individual link and link track. So, first and foremost, the track is not yet glued on. As I mentioned in videos similar to this, whenever the rare circumstances come where I actually build a tank with individual link and link tracks, I actually use them. The tracks are not glued onto the model. They are actually on a pontoon, like this right here. And if I go ahead and pop the piece off, you can see that the entire suspension running gear pops off as a single unit. This is done so that it makes it much easier for me to paint and weather these areas, as opposed when it's already stuck onto the tank, where you're going to have locations of missed paint, and it's just going to hurt the look of the model. Even though it's as small as it is, you will have areas where paint will not get to, and these locations will be areas, oddly enough, that you will be able to see. So, yeah, that's definitely something that always ends up kicking you, as opposed to helping you. So once I wiggle these guys loose, I can go ahead and continue with what was going on with the tracks on this build. So with the track removed, this brings us to the problem that I had. So I actually built the entire model suspension on this side without any sort of problems. The track all timed perfectly around the front idler, as well as the sprocket, which is actually something that's very noteworthy to mention specifically with individual link and line tracks, because they generally don't do that, which is why they suck. And they still suck. No, they have no illusions. Even though this tank was able to be built, the tracks are garbage. You can't stand these tracks. But back to the situation that happened here. Unfortunately, what I ran into was a problem with the wheels. And this has to do with, again, a human error, not the kit error. With the way the kit is designed, we have the main row wheels and the front idler, and they are two different parts on the sprues, and they are properly labeled. Unfortunately, on the Leopard 1, the front idler and the main row wheels look almost identical and are basically the exact same size. And to make matters worse, with the way the kit is designed, the axle locations are the exact same diameter for the row wheels as they are for the idler. You probably see where I'm going with this. And so what happened was, when I had all the wheels lined up and assembled, they got mixed up, and when it came time for assembly, I accidentally grabbed the idler wheel and threw it onto the location for the main road wheels. And this is what screwed me in. Because on the Leopard, the two wheels are different, and the differences are with the lug nuts. So you get to see the road wheels over here, and then you get to see the lug nuts on the idler. Obviously, it's very subtle, but it's one of those things that just bugged the hell out of me. And when I found out, well... Son of a bitch! So, to fix this, I basically had to undo what had been done. To make matters worse, the areas in both of the wheels were in the wrong location. Or I should say, fortunately, one of the wheels were in the wrong location. This one here fared out just fine. The planets lined up on that one. But this one here, the idler was actually all the way back here where it was timing with the rear section of the track. And then, of course, the other wheel was here where it had all these other tracks glued in place. And regrettably, I had to actually remove everything by soaking in super solvent, which it did a good job, which is, by the way, this stuff right over here did a decent enough job with dislodging the glue, but not to the point where I was able to get the pieces fully removed. And by the way, again, this is why I like super glue on my models, not cement. If I would use cement, I would have been completely screwed. So, fortunately, the parts were able to dislodge themselves from the appropriate locations with the super solvent. Unfortunately, I did suffer some losses with the track links here on the front. But if you notice, well, John, you replaced them. Well, as it turns out, when I was working on this model here, I'm actually working on another 1/72nd scale Revell Germany kit, and on that one, it actually has a problem with track link numbers. They're slightly too short. So I went ahead and while I was working on that build, I made a mold of those track links. Well, at the same time, I had this kit over here, and I'm like, okay, they're both Revell Germany kits. Let me go ahead, hedge my bets, and make a mold of the spare, or I should say the loose links for this one, just in case I run into the exact same problem. Well, for this one here, that wasn't an issue. I had just the right amount of links. The problem was you only have enough links for the job, so they were gone. But fortunately, I had the mold on hand, so with the way the planets lined up, I was able to cast some replacements and throw them onto the front wheel that you see here, leaving for the exact same result as it would be if I would have had the original plastic one. So I was actually really lucky that I had the wherewithal to go ahead and make those molds. But those out of the way, yes. If it wasn't for those molds, I would have been completely screwed. I would have had to have done something else, made a mold of a segment and do something with it. But or get another kit and just make a copy of the track links and build it differently. Those would have been my options. I would have been completely screwed. But fortunately, that wasn't the case, and I was able to pull a rabbit out of my hat. And that's all there is for this. From this point here, these guys are going to be primed, painted, weathered, and then at the very tail end of the build, during final assembly, they will be mounted at that point. The only thing missing on the suspension at this time are the return rollers. I have them. They're on the sprue. Those are going to be painted off the model and then secured on in place after the pontoons are fitted to the vehicle. So that's the order of execution on that. And that's all there is to mention about that. Oh, something else I just noticed, that the side view mirror looks like it's slumped over. Probably when the glues were setting, it kind of moved on me. Not a problem. I'll go ahead and address that off camera. Easily fixed. The rear section here, extremely detailed. A lot of little components that get glued on. So you're going to need a pair of tweezers, and you're going to want to make sure that you don't have any parts falling off the lost part yet. This model here has a lot of little parts that can easily happen to, so be careful with that. Fortunately, I got lucky and that wasn't the case. On cleaning some of these parts here, I found it best to do the procedure where I glue them on. I remove off the sprue, I glue them onto the model, then once onto the model, I carefully polish down the burr with some fine sandpaper, and once the pieces are fitted in place, you have more leverage and also gives you an easier way to manipulate and hold the part, as opposed to trying to hold a tiny little piece over there and remove the piece accordingly. So that's another trick that I've mentioned on a few other builds, and it works pretty well. For the turret over here, the gypsy rack goes together pretty well, and it is a multi-piece assembly. It's extremely detailed. It really is. And the only thing I did was I just added a little drop of super glue on the locations where the sections join, and with that out of the way, they fuse very well. There are these two little extender pieces that dangle off the sides of the turret. These are separate molded parts, very finely molded. Carefully remove them, fit them in place, wait for them to thoroughly dry, and then you could then continue with the remainder of the gypsy rack installed. You will thank me for that. The turret does have some sections that need to be drilled out for the optic over here, and as well as this center hole for the indicator light, or the traffic lights. It looks like the thing cop cars have. That's on the runner, will be painted and installed at the tail end of the build. The three holes are right over here. They are very clearly marked in the instructions, but you are going to need a pin vise to drill them out and a small Dremel bit. If you have the prerequisites, they drill really easily, and the piece just drops on accordingly. The holes all line up very well. On the front portion over here, the mantle is not functional. It has the tarpaulin it's not integrally molded on, it's a separate part, but it is solid plastic. There's no hinging whatsoever, and this is the height that the barrel's at, so it's one of those things where you'll just have to live with. But fortunately, it's at a nice height, and it looks the part very nicely. Also, like the rendering here on the tarpaulin looks very good. It's going to look great once it's painted and weathered. The 105, single piece molding, which is excellent, just some small seam work to contend with. It's not really a seam, more of a mold joint line. Go over these areas here with a fine sandpaper and just polish it down very quickly. And I did drill the muzzle, or I should say, the muzzle section out with a pin vise because it is molded flat. So do that, and the mouse accuracy does go up. Of course, if you don't have the tooling or the technique for that, you don't want to do that. But if you do, definitely it cannot be recommended enough. Turret halves, two half assembly. Seam work, very easily polished away with just some super glue and some fine sandpaper. Some wet sanding was done, leaving for the end result that we have here. That's really all there is to it. So, from here, I'm going to go ahead and get these pieces primed, and I'm going to continue with the install, and then the whole model can then go off into paint. And as for primer, I don't think I'm going to use spray paint on this. I'm actually, I think on this one, and as well as a few other 172s I have, I'm going to roll with just Tamiya acrylic flat black for the base coat of primer. Just because of the small scale that they are, I feel that the paint will probably be a little bit more, have more precision compared to my standard spray paint, or specifically the brands I'm using now. They tend to be a little bit, I don't want to say thick, but for 135 they're okay, but for 172 I would feel definitely more comfortable with rolling with Tamiya with the airbrush. So more information on that to come, but that's all there is to say at this point here. Let's just continue to the next scene. Jumping forward a little bit, now the model at this point is fully ready for painting. The side armor has been added in place and it really changed the look of the vehicle quite a bit. Obviously you can see why I went ahead and pre-primed the locations that I mentioned before. The one thing I do want to mention about the armor is that it goes on really easily and efficiently. However, there's one other thing that needs to be done by the builder, and I don't recall it being mentioned in the instructions. With the way the armor is, there's a little peg molded into the sections here and has to plug into the turret, and the holes, or I should say the locations, are marked on the turret itself with a little divot that needs to be drilled out. This is not mentioned in the instructions, and if you're assembling this, you're going to have to add that hole or else the pieces are not going to fit on appropriately. Fortunately, getting access to these locations here with a pin vise is really easily done. You can still get into it even though the turret is fully assembled. Hopefully it comes out on camera exactly where the hole is. It's somewhere right over there. Not really sure if you guys can see it, but anyway, it's easy to get in there with the pin vise and drill them out. Once they're drilled out, you just make sure the hole's the appropriate size, and then the piece of armor just locks on like magic. It just lines up absolutely perfectly. Two rear sections get installed in place, small little seam, super glue, little swipe in there, plugs it up very well, and you're all set. The smoke grenade launchers also then plug on, and then you install on the little grab handles over here. They install very easily. This one here, during the deburring process, I actually broke. Fortunately, I was able to get the piece re-glued on, and with a little bit of glue or super glue, I add to the section over here, fusing the busted section together, and then I polish it down with some sandpaper, leaving for a smooth, seamless end result. Once the thing is painted and weathered, it'll blend in with the remainder of the detailing without batting an eye. Jumping forward a little bit takes us to the model at this point here where the tracks have been installed because the weathering and the paintwork has all been concluded. The tracks just plug directly in place. However, you do have to make sure that the tolerances on the swing arms are open because with the extra layers of paint, it becomes very difficult to install the components in a efficient manner, and it could lead to problems. Such problems could be at worst snapping a torsion bar. That's not great. Or the piece is not being able to be fully seated, which will cascade with a bunch of problems when it comes time for adding on the side skirts. So everything needs to be timed perfectly, and the best way to do that is after you paint it with an X-Acto, you just scrape the swing arm a little bit, remove the paint off the surfaces, and the piece will then slide right on. The other reason, or I should say the other thing I want to mention at this time is with the small little return rollers. The return rollers are painted off the model and then are installed during the track installation. With the way the Leopard is, you have two rows of rollers. The first row actually gets installed before the suspension gets fitted in place. As you can see, it supports the track on the opposite side of the track tooth, which is something that's pretty tricky to do when you have the track already fitted in place. So you snip those off the sprue, glue them on, put the track on, and then you do the last two return rollers, leaving for the end result that you have here. The rollers on the Leopard 1 are rubber rims, so I went ahead and painted them while they were still on the runners before snipping them off and then mounting them in place. Even though, admittedly, with this version here, with the side skirts, it's not going to be seen. But again, it's one of those things I want to address and just make sure I cover my bases with when I do a build. Now that these components are fitted in place, I can continue with the remainder of the build, which would be throwing on the side skirts and continuing with the last of the paintwork. Starting with the model suspension, as I mentioned before, the suspension is one of the kit's most detailed aspects, and with the suspension in its final format now, you really get to see all of that hard work come into fruition. So starting with the row wheels themselves, as I mentioned before, the moldings are very crisp and are very detailed even for 1/72 scale. They paint and hold the panel line accent extremely well. As you can see, all of the hubcaps and fastener lugs are all there. And of course, this being a Bundeswehr vehicle, the center portion of the hubcaps would have a little drop of red paint on every one of them. And this is something that we see on the Leopard 2s, the Martyrs, even a lot of the World War II German tanks, specifically if you watch my channel. You'll know that the hubcaps usually have a small little zerk fitting on the face, and they're always painted in red. And on this one here, it's definitely no exception. To paint these, this was definitely something that's a bit challenging, being at such small scale, but I was able to pull it off. I either used a small, very fine point paintbrush, or I think I even used a sewing pin, and I just dipped the tip in a little bit, to me, a flat red, and just added to the appropriate locations. This is something where you definitely want to have your paint nice at the fine consistency, because obviously it could run amok, and if it does that, you're going to be screwed. But if you pull it off and pull it off well, it's going to make the model definitely pop, and it's something that really shows the completeness of the build as opposed to leaving the red absent that sadly a lot of people out there tend to do. Of course, this is true for not just the main row wheels, but the front idler and the sprocket as well. And while on that topic, this leads us to talking about the remainder of the track assembly. Of course, this tank having the tracks that it does, and if you are absolutely screwed and have to go with the link-a-link track for one reason or another, the best course of action is the pontoon method that I showed before. It's the best way, or I should say it's your best chances on getting the track fully assembled properly, cleanly, and being able to paint and weather the things without any sort of extra complications. I could already hear some people saying, but John, why don't you paint and weather the tracks off the model on sprues and then install at the tail end of the build? And that is a technique that some people have tried, myself included, and we all failed at it, myself included. It doesn't work. It sounds good in theory, but the problem is when you paint and weather everything, it's time to remove off the sprue and to assemble onto the track, or I should say assemble onto the suspension, and it just doesn't work. It goes sideways very quickly. The links need to be deburred. They need to be hand fitted sometimes depending on the kit, and it just makes a mess of things, and that's doubly compounded when everything's already finished. So it's a terrible technique. The best way to assemble link-a-links, if you have to do it, is with the pontoon method. Even with the pontoon method, painting is a little trickier. It's definitely trickier compared to single piece vinyl because your working space is much more confined compared to before when everything is off the model. But no matter how I position the build, as you can see, you will not be able to see any sort of missed areas of paint, and everything is painted through and through, indicative of a very good quality build. The trickiest part, of course, is to go ahead and thoroughly paint and weather the track, with causing as little collateral damage as possible. Again, this is where the pontoon method definitely comes into its own. With the pieces off of the tank, I'm able to go ahead and get full access to get the things painted. However, even with the pieces off the model, you still have such small working surfaces that it's still a little bit trickier compared to single piece vinyl, which everything is separate. Obviously, it gives you free range to paint and weather accordingly. But even though you're still able to carefully navigate the waters and get a good outcome. So on this one over here, jumping forward a little bit to paint, which is Tamiya NATO Green, I went ahead and added a shot of NATO Green with the airbrush dead center of all these road wheels, and any sort of overspray was dealt with the paintbrush. Rubber black was painted on all of the rubber tires over here, and the track was also again painted with the paintbrush. The trickiest aspect was the sprocket because of the nature of it. It's got several dimensions to it, and you got to make sure paint goes in there. I believe I went ahead and hit the front face with the airbrush, and the inner confines I hit with the paintbrush. That gives me a little bit more precision. As for painting and weathering the tracks, I went with my usual techniques that are used for other vehicles with similar tracks that are found on this channel. And as for the track design themselves, the tracks on the Leopard, and the same is true for all the other tracked vehicles in the Bundeswehr, are live tracks with the same design as we see on American late pattern World War II tracks, such as the HVSS Sherman, the M26, and M46 Patton. Which is why I tend to scoff and snicker whenever I hear someone make the ridiculous statement, "Oh, the Leopard is the descendant of the Tiger and the Panther." Yeah, it's not. It's nothing more than a Germanified M46 or M26 Pershing. That's it. This vehicle has way more in common with those two than it does with the German World War II big tank. So, yeah, we kind of need Maury Povich on this one, but even though Tiger and Panther...
You are not...
And I'm pretty sure I pissed off a lot of people with that statement, but hard pills are hard to swallow. Look into your heart, you know it to be true. Anyway, back to the model over here. So the track needs to be painted to replicate both metal and rubber, and this is a great way to add a bit of extra accuracy to your model as opposed to leaving everything overpainted with one shade of black or gray or what have you. And it also gives the model more color pop, making it again look that much more finely polished. So to do this, the metal parts, or what would be metal, are painted to look like rusty bits, and the rubber is just painted with Tamiya rubber black to look like, well, rubber. And this is done to both the exterior portions and the interior portions. On the track, on the Leopard, we have this rubber pad that is bolted to the outer extremities, and then there's another pad on the inside that the road wheels ride on, as you can see right there. Some careful painting with the paintbrush was definitely utilized. For the teeth, I also painted them again with the rust color, as you can see. Now, a lot of people who watch my videos will say, but John, you frequently say that tracks don't really rust that often because of the material that they're made in, and also there's an oxide coating on them. True, however, keep in mind, this tank here being a Leopard 1A5, this was several decades after the parts were installed and fitted to the vehicle, and it's not uncommon to see vehicles that are at this stage in life to have tracks that are starting to show their age, and this is definitely something that we see here on this build. Go on the internet, find lots of pictures of these things, even held, again, M60s, M48s, it's the same type of track, and look at the pictures of these vehicles, specifically ones that are older, have been sitting for a little bit. They tend to have tracks that look just like this example here. There are other options to render the tracks. You can render it with a slightly different other color of gray for the tracks if they're more newer, but generally when I've seen these things, they tend to have the tracks in the following format. But again, either way, that's best left up to the builder's discretion. The bottom line is you want to have the tracks painted with two different types of colors to show the difference in materials. From the tracks and the suspension takes the remainder of the details, starting with the rear plate. And the rear plate details are all stock out of the box without any sort of problems with the fitting. The kit is extremely detailed, and these pieces are all separate parts that need to be carefully removed, deburred, and installed in place. And if the planets line up and you definitely are on your A game that day, you'll be able to install everything without any sort of issues. The one thing that I found actually very impressive was with the design here of the tow cables with the tow hook. This was something that Revell could have easily have done a easier way with making the tow eye and the tow hook a single molded part so the piece just drops on in place. However, they did the proper thing where they actually molded this as two separate pieces, which means you have to thread the needle during the installation, and this is something that, again, you need to be on your A game with. The tow cables go on very well, but you definitely need to, again, make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, because one little mistake and something can easily snap, break, and you're done. Fortunately, I didn't have that problem this one over here. Specifically, when it came time to installing it on here and then plugging it in place, whew, I was on pins and needles with that one, but I was still able to pull it off. So much so that if you are working on one of these builds, and you aren't comfortable working with the cables, you might want to just leave them off. It'll probably be better for you. But on this one here, I said, screw it, let's do it. And I was able to pull it off. And I'm really glad I was, because the cabling came out to be absolutely perfect. With the way the kit is rendered, with all the curves of the cable and everything, they went on without any sort of issues. The cables, however, are something I add at the very tail end of the build after everything is painted and weathered. Some people out there like to paint it while everything is glued in place, and you have to carefully paint everything with a paintbrush. However, me, I like to do the opposite, where I paint it off the model, then try to install at the very tail end. Either way, both have pros and cons. Whichever way works best for you. Me, I did it the other way, and so far, I'm very happy how it turned out. If I was to do it again, I wouldn't change anything. While talking about paintwork, takes to the taillights, and all the taillights are properly rendered, and I had to paint them. And whew, talk about fine point painting. Yeah, that is definitely some fine point painting that we got here. And the format's quite simple. The two round ones that we have here are red taillights. The larger one that we have here in the guard are orange taillights. Other lights to mention are the tiny little bulbs located right next to each of the rear taillights, which are painted in red. And yes, I painted them, and talk about walking on pins and needles while doing that painting technique as well. But I was still able to pull it off, fortunately. The other thing to mention, jumping ahead a little bit, is with the convoy light right here. The Bundeswehr pattern vehicles are distinctive with having this shield or this tombstone-shaped object on the rear, and it's for convoy light usage. And the kit gives you 4 tiny little white decals to give you the shape of the cross, and I was able to get them in place. However, when the model was going through its varnishing, they decided to blow off, so I had to go ahead and repaint them. Fortunately, painting these aren't that tricky. You just need a very fine point paintbrush and a little bit of flat white, and I was able to make do, and it came out pretty well. But that is something I do want to mention you have to be careful with on this build, and we'll circle back to that when I go over the decals. Also on the rear, we have these two mud flaps. These are actually rubber on the real vehicle, if I'm not mistaken. So when you're painting and weathering them, weather them accordingly, don't make them rusty. On that note, I believe the whole side skirt might be a flexible rubber material as well. I definitely know the front ones are definitely rubber. They get painted over much along the lines like you see on an M113, but just like on an M113, I'm pretty sure they flake off pretty easily. So when you're painting and weathering a Bundeswehr vehicle like this, definitely keep that in mind. Also, one thing I always loved and dug about the Bundeswehr pattern tanks is this zigzag type side skirt. Very distinctive, even the Martyrs have it. It's just something that definitely stands out amongst their vehicles. Jumping our way to the front of the vehicle takes us to the other details. Again, everything is nicely detailed and is separately molded and needs to be installed by you, the builder. This would include things like the headlights, the tow shackles, the tow hooks, the side view mirrors, and the corner lift lugs right there and there. Again, everything is nicely rendered out, and the onus on properly deburring and removing off the sprue and yet fitting is definitely on you. A tweezer on this build is definitely going to be an asset you want to invest in. Also on that note, you can see everything has been painted. The headlights have the lenses painted. The small little highway lights there have their orange lenses painted as well. It's a distinctive feature found again on Bundeswehr tanks. The side view mirrors are painted appropriately where the metal parts are NATO green, which would include the stem, as well as the back portion here of the side view mirror. The rubber visor, I guess the best way to put it, is painted with, to me, a rubber black. And the inner portion there I painted with a little swipe of silver paint. Again, it will be a mirror on the real unit. It's a very distinctive feature found on German tanks or I should say Bundeswehr pattern vehicles. Even the M48s that were in Bundeswehr service received the same upgrades. On the driver's section over here, all the periscopes were painted with a little swipe of gloss black. Very precision painting was definitely required. And on the note of precision painting, that takes us to the side details that we have here, which would be all the Pioneer tools. The Pioneer tools I mentioned before are all molded into the upper hull, which does streamline immensely the construction, but it does make painting a bit more tricky because you have to carefully, thoroughly paint everything and make sure the paints don't bleed out. Again, you want to have an excellent paintbrush for this, and you also want to have your paints at the perfect consistency. As I often say, too runny, it goes all over the place. Too thick, too chunky, you're not doing yourself any favors. You have the nice mid-ground over there. Also, when you're painting tools like this, you want to make sure that the tool posts are painted appropriately for the vehicle. You don't want to get them painted in wood or the metal color for your spade heads. Same is true, by the way, for the opposite side. On the opposite side here, we also have some clean staves. I also painted them slightly differently, again, as per real pictures of the Leopard ones I've seen on the internet. Back to the front of the hull takes us to the track cleats, and one thing that's interesting about Bundeswehr tanks is, like I mentioned before, you have the rubber pads on the track, but you can remove the rubber pads and fit on one of these steel cleats here, and it gives you more traction on things like ice. It's a really distinctive German feature, and on the Leopard one here, they were stowed in the front, giving you just a little bit of extra standoff armor. And the pieces are integrally molded. They are nicely shaped. On this one here, I left them oversprayed, as I have seen them like this on several real examples, but you do have several options to render them, either all black, rusty, but again, I render them in the oversprayed color. The other thing to mention was the panel line accent went in here absolutely perfectly, and it really made everything pop nicely. And again, it's just one aspect of the kit that is very nicely rendered out. Moving topside takes us to the rear engine deck. Again, beautifully rendered, definitely one of the kit's high points. The molding is excellent. All the details are there, nicely and properly, thoroughly rendered out, and it just makes painting and weathering that much more enjoyable. The panel line accent just flows into these sections over here, and once done, it looks awesome. The only thing to watch out for is the paint consistency with the layers of paint for the primer, the base, and the camo, but I'll circle back to that as the video goes on. But either way, if you have everything properly done, the end result is excellent. Also, you can see the tools over here. These were the separate bits of tooling that I was mentioning before. They're painted NATO green, straps are painted, as you can see, and everything was just mounted as per the kit. No fuss, no muss. On the front section, you could also see the driver's hatch right there. Went on without any sort of issues. The fit on the kit is quite excellent. One thing that I did forget to mention before is with the fitting of the upper and lower hull, and also with the rear plate over here, it does fit very, very well, but you do have some slight seam work to contend with on this area, but this is, again, quite customarily seen on all builds. Just some slight, thick super glue added to these areas, polished down with some sandpaper, of course, before all the fittings get added, and you should be good to go. The front has a natural seam in this area over here, and with the way you see it on the kit, I didn't have to do any sort of bodywork whatsoever. Carrying on to the turret, as I mentioned before, the turret is very nicely detailed, and with the way the applicant armor gets secured on in place, it is very well thought out, and things go together pretty well. Now that it's fully painted and weathered, you get to see all of the areas I was mentioning before, and you really get to appreciate the pre-primer technique that I was referencing earlier. As one can imagine, trying to get in here with layers of paint may be a bit tricky. The hatches go together very well. Again, multi-piece assembly, as is everything else on this vehicle. And the gypsy rack, whew, that was also a fun one to put together, as I referenced before. Even the rear bustle bin was a multi-piece assembly. Take your time, and it should go together very well. The fit on the kit is, again, fantastic. As I mentioned before with the smoke grenade launchers, if you are installing them, be sure to install them after the applicant armor is fitted in place. Trust me, it will make the installation go by much more smoothly. Same is also true, by the way, for the brush guards and the side handles that we have here. Also, on the topic of the applicant armor, hopefully it comes out on camera, but you can see the texture and the surface crinkling of the armor panels themselves. Very distinctive aspect on the Leo 1 A5 upgrades, and the kit renders it out flawlessly. And again, it's also impressive that they're able to get this level of detailing in 1/72nd scale. Moving topside takes to the MG Dry. Of course, painted and weathered my usual format with the use of dry brushing to get the worn look that we see here. For the buttstock and the pistol grip on a MG3, these would be made out of a polymer or plastic type material, so they would always be black, or specifically gloss black in color. I've seen a lot of people out there when they render out Bundeswehr vehicles, sometimes they go with a red, or they think it's a wood color like on an MG42 from World War II, and that's not the case for an MG3. All the MG3s I've seen, the buttstock and pistol grips are always a shiny black color plastic. So for this one here, I replicated as such using just Tamiya gloss black on the appropriate locations, and once it's all done, it looks absolutely the part. Being 1/72nd scale, I did not drill out the muzzle section. Trying to do that in this scale would have definitely been a fool's errand. So I just left it El Natural in that type of format. Also, you can see the periscopes coming into light. Again, a little swipe of gloss black on all of those. Pretty tricky to do in this small scale, but obviously I was able to persevere. Same is also true for the optic that we have right here on the front. Holds paint very well, and once it's done, it looks great. There's another optic right over here. Again, painted in the appropriate format, where the bottom portion would be a green color, or NATO green, and the optic itself is a black color, and then the lens is a little swipe of gloss. I believe it's a highway light. It's right over here mounted on the roof. As I mentioned before, you have to drill out a small hole in the top deck. This is kit supplied, and I just painted in the following format. The stem is just painted with Tamiya flat black, and the orange dome is Tamiya orange. More than suffice for the application at hand, and it gives, again, the vehicle a bit of extra color pop. Moving forward takes us to the tarpaulin. Like I was referencing before, the tarpaulin is fantastically rendered on this kit. Amazingly done. Paints very well. Once it's all painted and weathered, it looks the part. For the color, I used actually a Model Master color. It was Braun Violet, which is a color that I used as a base coat on some earlier pattern of Bundeswehr tanks. But for a vehicle like this, it really looks the part. It's a nice little color contrast, and it paints well. The tarpaulin, of course, is painted with a paintbrush, and then after everything was varnished, it has the final effect that you see here. I'll go back to that as the thing goes on. The front armor on the mantlet also goes on very nicely. You also want to paint behind here prior to installation for the same reasons that I mentioned before. On the 105, again, nicely rendered out of the box, single piece molding, just some slight swipes that need to be done to remove the mold split lines, and you are good to go. Muzzle section drilled out, as I also referenced before. Again, it just improves the accuracy of the build. As I always say, if you don't have the tooling or the experience, don't do that. You can easily screw it up. But if you do, it never hurts the build whenever you do the part appropriately. And that's all there is to the details, and this takes us to the paint and the markings. So for the model's paintwork, I again went with a 3-tone NATO camouflage pattern, which would be more than appropriate for a Leo 1A5. Before the model gets painted with its base coat or camouflage, of course it has to be primed. This is something I always recommend and stress on this channel. Regardless of the paint choice or manufacturer that you're using, you have to get the thing primed. It always makes the build come out that much better. Some people like to use some certain brands or like to use a gray color. Me personally, I like to roll with black, flat black specifically. Now, another thing that I generally harp in these videos is that I use flat black cheap spray paint to do the primer job. And I was going to do that with this one over here. However, at the time I was building and painting this tank, the Home Depot, which was my source of the cheap spray paint, no longer stocks that stuff, and I don't even think it's in production, or at least at the time I was filming or working on this model. So I had to find an alternate source, so I went to Lowe's, and they also had a cheap brand of spray paint, and I went ahead and picked up a bunch of cans and decided to experiment, because I'm not just going to go from the get-go and throw it onto a model, let alone something at 1/72nd. That's madness. I definitely want to play it safe. So while I was doing my own T&E on the paints, I needed to get this one built and painted, so I played it safe. I rolled with Tamiya acrylic. The acrylic paint was applied via the airbrush, went on nice and smooth. Tamiya's excellent paint quality, and it had some excellent effects. After the primer was done, I went ahead and added the base coat for the NATO green. The entire NATO tricolor on this vehicle here is again all done with Tamiya acrylics. Tamiya has the best NATO tricolors on the market, and they are fantastic for the green, NATO black, and NATO brown. Excellent colors. I recommend them all the time, and I've used them on several other vehicles on this channel with a similar type camo pattern. However, where this model deviates from the other examples is with the paint application. So the airbrush was used to apply the base coat. However, the remainder of the camouflage pattern was not done with the airbrush, which is definitely a departure from my other builds. Instead, I went with a paintbrush technique to apply the remainder of the camo. This is something I've been toying around a lot lately in scales from 135 and in this case 172 for one reason or another. There are just some applications where the paintbrush technique is probably the better course of action as opposed to trying to get the paint applied via the airbrush. This is most notably done with my Merc camouflage patterns. It just looks so much better in my opinion with the paintbrush technique as opposed to the airbrush. And for this one here, I went with that type of technique. The reason was not because necessarily that the tricolor looks better with the paintbrush technique, but more or less with the scale. Because this model is 172, trying to apply the camouflage pattern with the airbrush would have been a bit more problematic, and I would not have been able to get the blotches as crisp or as well defined with the airbrush as opposed to going with the paintbrush. If I bring them all up closer to the camera, you can see just what I'm referring to, how nice and crisp and defined all of the camo blotches are, and it's definitely true to form to the real one. For the application, again, you want to have all of your ducks in a row, just like I was referencing with the tools. This would include both the paintbrush being nice and crisp, fresh, in excellent shape, and also your paint being at just the right consistency. This is what will make or break a paint job with a paintbrush. I've seen lots of people out there that go with a paintbrush because they don't have an airbrush or anything along those lines, and a lot of times you can tell they are novices at this because the paint is just too chunky and sticks out like a sore thumb. A good paintbrush job, the paint will be as flat as humanly possible. And again, I'm not talking about the surface sheen. I'm talking about on the surface texturing. If the camera gets in focus, you will see that it looks like it's like a UV image. It doesn't look like it's applied on the vehicle. And that is, again, testament to having the paints properly thinned out. To thin out my paints, I just use standard tap water. So I have the paint from the bottle. I usually have a little bit of it in the cap. I take a little drop of water on the paintbrush, and I just mix it in. And at that point there, I have the right consistency, and I can go ahead and apply the camouflage blotches in the appropriate locations. Again, consistency is the key. If it hits like a little line like that, and if it's not the right consistency, it will just run along that line like the panel line accent does, and now your life's a bit more complicated. But as you can see here, I was able to apply the camouflage pattern without any sort of problems, and being the small scale that it is, the application was done fairly quickly. For the application layout, the instructions have some excellent illustrations that are rendered, and you could just basically just follow the format in the instructions to get the appropriate paint in the right locations. After the camouflage was complete, of course, the model was then weathered. I went ahead and weathered it with the same effects I do on the other builds, and this was all done with the airbrush. The model has a yellow filter on it. It also has a little bit of a cream wash, and from there, panel lines were modulated with the use of diluted Tamiya flat black. And after that was concluded, Tamiya panel line accent was done for the rest. The panel line accent does a fantastic job of getting to all the nooks and crannies, like I mentioned before with the row wheels, or even back here with the with the engine deck. That grill work there just loves the panel line accent, as do these guys over here. Not to mention that non-slip stuff right there on the fenders. Then after the panel line accent was done, chipping was accomplished with my dry brushing technique. For the exhaust soot and powder fouling, this was done with Tamiya flat black, less diluted Tamiya flat black because you want more opacity, and that is applied again to the muzzle section as well as to the exhaust manifolds. And on the Leopard 1 over here, the exhausts are in this distinctive pattern right here, and just a little poof or two of flat black in those areas is enough to achieve the desired result. After the exhaust soot was added, it was then time to paint the shiny bits, but that was done after the markings. So for the markings themselves, I used, again, the water slide decals that are supplied with the kit, and they are phenomenal quality decals. These things are superb. They went on without any sort of problems. The only thing about the markings is that you actually have a surprising high number of them for a model this tiny, and because of the model being this tiny, the decals themselves are itsy bitsy. Okay, so the application you really have to take your time with. You need to have a tweezer. A toothpick will definitely be of assistance. Well, we need a toothpick and a tweezer for every decal, but on this one over here, it's definitely going to be recommended. Put a little dab of water with a small paintbrush, and then you drag the decal across once it's ready. Use a paper towel to dab the extra water off, and the decal stays put. All the decals carefully get added in place. The instructions are very good on the decal application, and you just follow the instructions and you should have no problems. The only issue I had with the decals, like I mentioned before, is with the cruciform area back here, where the decals went on, and boy was that tricky, but I was still able to get them in place. Unfortunately, they blew off during the varnish application, which is something that can easily happen. You want to be careful when you're varnishing your models. For this one here, for the varnish, of course, I rolled with VMS Matte Varnish. I absolutely love that product to no end, and I can't wait to restock on some more. I have plenty on stock, but I always want to keep more on inventory. The varnish does a fantastic job with making everything nice and flat. It secures the decals in place, gets rid of any silvering. Excellent product. If you're in the market for a varnish, that stuff I recommend to absolutely no end. After the varnish work was done, it was then time to do the shiny bits, which include the lights, the blinkers, all that stuff. Oh, one thing I also forgot to mention, my iconic bit of detailing on German Bundeswehr tanks are the smoke grenade launchers. They have rubber caps on them. Be sure to paint those with a little swipe of rubber black, like I did here. And the pieces will definitely come out much better if you render it in that format. In the end, I am thrilled on how the model turned out. This was a really, really fun build. I did have that slight little kerfuffle before with the tracks, but once that was worked itself out, the remainder of the build went by as smooth as silk. The build is a very interesting one. It's a really interesting piece to have in my collection, and it's one that I definitely have no regrets on. And that is the perfect point to pivot us into skill level and recommendation. So straight out of the gate, if you are a beginner modeler, this is absolutely certainly not, keyword capital N, capital O, capital T, going to be the kit for you. Nope, pass on this entirely. This here is a kit that is very, very misleading because you'll see the box art. You see, it's 172. This is not going to be a problem. It's a fun little, quick little build. Oh, yeah, I can throw it together in an afternoon. Not this one. This one here is definitely something that punches far above its own weight and is misleading. With the amount of small fiddly parts this thing has, a beginner will not have a good time putting this together. If they'll even get it put together at all, it will be a disaster. Might even turn you off to modeling altogether. Don't do it. Seriously, if you see this in a hobby shop, put it down and carry on with it to find something else that's going to be more to your liking. In my opinion, this kit here is a solid mid to an advanced level kit. And you know what? Even Revell Germany essentially came to the exact same conclusion I did with giving this thing a skill level of 4. So basically, both of our opinions echo one another. And what's giving this model this type of a skill level range is with the nature of the parts. The model itself has very small, fiddly parts, which again is why I can't recommend it to a builder. You really need to have your skill sets and your ducks in a row with dealing with small molded parts, but not just with handling them onto the sprue, removing them, cleaning them, and installing them onto the model. All of these are going to require a little bit of finesse and a certain skill set to have, because anything could go wrong anywhere in between, and if the pieces tend to fling off the Lost Partia, you are screwed. On top of that, components on the suspension are definitely something that you really need to be on the ball for. The sprocket alone has lots of small little appendages with the way the teeth are rendered out, and this is something that can easily be over snipped or broken during assembly. Even the assembly of the sprocket itself is pretty tricky with getting all the details to fit in place. Again, it's so nicely detailed that handling it becomes a slight bit of a challenge. Then this goes to the track. Of course, individual link tracks suck on a good day, but on this one here, it definitely adds the bulk of the complexity to the model. As we saw earlier, even I myself made the small little error on flipping the wheels, and it basically screwed me for the entire build. If it wasn't for the fact I know how to do wrestling castings, I would have been completely out to lunch. So, by and large, I cannot stress this enough, you really need to have your ducks in a row. Outside of the suspension, the remainder of the build goes by actually very easily and pretty effortlessly. Again, with the caveat that you're good with moving and manipulating small fiddly bits. The gypsy racks were definitely something that can give you a curveball, as are several of the other small pieces of handrails and tools that are supplied with this kit. Again, what all of this means is if you are a mid-level builder, and by mid-level I mean someone that's already built about 16 or so kits, and you yourself are starting to work on the more challenging kits from Dragon or AV Club, something along those lines, basically kits where you're starting to dabble with photo etch, this then becomes something that's going to be viable to you. Obviously, an advanced builder can easily tackle one of these models. Perhaps they might say it's a bit overly simplistic with the way the pieces are rendered all in plastic, and there's some 172 builders out there that are so hardcore, they're looking for stuff that has photo etch, and those people, that's a whole nother topic. But if you're just an advanced builder and looking for something to throw together out of the box, this build here definitely is a viable one, and I recommend it to you. Enough said about that, and this pivots us back into recommendations. So right out of the gate, if you are eine deutsche Bundeswehr Soldaten oder Soldaten, then yeah, this kit definitely becomes something that you would have some interest in. If you are into just the West German tanks, just Bundeswehr vehicles in general, Cold War era vehicles, NATO vehicles, this kit here is definitely recommended and is an awesome little piece. Of course, the Leo 1 was widely exported out throughout NATO, and if you're looking to build this as a non-Bundeswehr version of the Leopard 1, that is where this kit does fall short, because again, you're stuck with the markings that the kit gives you being just for the Bundeswehr. However, I'm pretty sure that if anyone has the chops out there with working with decals, or there may be even an aftermarket set that I'm unaware of, that can potentially use this base kit here and turn it into a non-Bundeswehr version of the Leopard 1. If you have the scratch building or the 3D printing capabilities, I'm pretty sure you could also use this kit as a base to come up with some other versions of the Leo 1 that were also used by other NATO countries, like the Canadians come to mind, right off the top of my head. As I mentioned before, these kits are not nearly as prolific, specifically in the US, as some other kits I've brought onto the table. So if you do encounter one of these, and you can encounter for a good price, perhaps it's definitely something to check out, specifically if, again, you have the skill levels that this kit does require. I will say, if you do have the skill sets, this is actually a really fun little build, and it's one that I personally had a huge amount of enjoyment with throwing together. After the pleasant experience I had with this one over here, I definitely see myself potentially getting the recently released set, where it's a 2-pack with this and the Bieber bridge layer, which is essentially this hull here, but with a scissors bridge located on top of it, Really cool vehicle, and since they are fairly common right now, perhaps I might jump on one sooner than later, just again to have it in the stash and to get to it to a later date. And obviously, if I do, that'll definitely be the subject matter of an upcoming video, but again, that remains to be seen. Either way, I'm really glad that I have this example here for my collection. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for the 1/72nd scale Bundeswehr Kampfpanzer Leopard 1A5. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep updated on new posted content, being small scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or my other larger scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted on this channel. Another way to keep in loop with new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Bis später.